I just want to welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amy Propel, and I'm the director of UF Center for European Studies. Our center is both a Jean Monnet Center of Excellence funded by the European Union and a Title VI National Resource Center funded by the US federal government focused on Europe. Today, we are here to discuss declassified documents and digital humanities, a work in progress. This talk is part of the center's lunchtime symposium series. We host 3 to 4 lunchtime symposium talks every semester, and we encourage advanced graduate students and faculty members who have ongoing research to reach out to us if you would also like to present during the lunchtime symposium. We do both guest speakers and UF faculty and graduate students. So if you're interested, please send us an email. Our speaker today, who we're very lucky to have with us, is Dr. Timothy Sale. He is an assistant professor of history and director of the International Relations Program at the University of Toronto. So he is coming to us from the Great White North. He is the author of Enduring Alliance, the history of NATO and the post-war global order, and I'm sure has become increasingly popular over the last few weeks. He will be discussing that work this evening at 6 at the Bob Graham Center. So for those of you who are interested in more about the history of NATO and the post-war global order, please go ahead to that talk at the Pew Hall of Fora at 6. This afternoon, however, he's discussing a different project called Canada Declassified, on which he worked with graduate and undergraduate students at the University of Toronto. Canada Declassified is a web repository of recently declassified archival records. The project has been supported by an SSHRC Insight Development Grant and a CONOC New Research Grant. So he is helping folks to understand how to do digital humanities in some ways and to use these declassified documents or approach declassified documents in their research.
Great.
And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Professor Cabell, and to Lisa and to Carla for making this happen. And thanks everybody for being here. I really just think of today as a discussion. I would like to show you a few things and tell you about some projects, in particular this one project that we're working on in Toronto. It's true, I had to walk through some snow to get to the airport yesterday, but here I am. So I guess I'll start off by saying this is not a project that is done by any stretch. It's very much a work in progress. And there's a lot to critique about it. And, you know, again, I'm going to show it to you. And I would not want you to think that I'm here to show it off. There's a difference between showing you something and showing it off. So I want to show you this, show you how we are getting undergraduate and graduate students to engage with both declassified documents and digital humanities, making things available publicly online using the internet, right? So trying to combine this world of the dusty archives, and especially in the last couple of years when it's been so hard to get to the archives, how we're trying to make sure that graduate students especially can keep doing their work and not have to delay their PhD or their master's indefinitely. So again, just really informal. I would really appreciate any clarifying questions or thoughts, or just throw up your hand, please. I do not have really, hopefully not too stilted remarks to make. So the first thing I have to explain, I guess, is that I'm coming to this project as a historian. And I know we've got people from different disciplines here, but historians are historians no matter what country they're in. And so I do think you could swap out, anytime you see Canada or Canadian here, you can just, your eyes can glaze over and you can forget about the Canadian component. This would work with British, American, French, Spanish, German, whatever documents. It's more the form I want to show you. But what we do as historians, especially historians studying the Cold War or after, I mean, our biggest challenge to start our research is just getting access to documents. Okay, they are security classified when they're created. They're secret, top secret, whatever, ultra secret if you're in the UK at the right time. And so they go into the archives like that. They're closed to researchers. And different countries have different rules for releasing these documents, but essentially, the United States, like Canada, are just totally overwhelmed. They made so many secret documents that they don't have an easy system for opening them to researchers. And that means that researchers have to find out what they want to see and then ask for those documents, and then the governments decide whether you can see them or not, basically. Okay, so I've done a lot of research in the US at the presidential libraries where I actually, even though I'm not even an American citizen, I can ask the US government, hey, could you please make those documents declassified now? Can you open them? And the US government decides. Usually they say no, and I say, well, I will appeal that decision, and then maybe they say yes. And so it's this sort of back and forth process. You might have heard of Freedom of Information Act. That's one way you can get to documents in the US, but not the only way. And we have a law like that, Access to Information Act. Basically, Canadians can ask to see documents, and then the government reviews them and decides. So at our archives in Ottawa, they do this very strange thing where they actually scan all of the documents we request, and then they send them out to the various agencies that made them. And the agencies decide, so National Defense, sort of like our Pentagon decides, or our State Department, which we call Global Affairs Canada. And because they've digitized the documents, if they're releasable, either in whole or if they're sanitized with black lines, the archive does this really weird thing. And this is really the genesis of the project. They use this ancient technology called a compact disc, CD. They put the file on a CD and they mail it to me in the actual post. Okay, so under the law, those documents are now open and anybody can see them. But I'm the only one who has a CD. The government doesn't put them online. And if you go to the archives, they sometimes don't even know that another agency has said they're open. So we were running into this really bizarre problem where we're researchers, historians, we would all have these stacks of CDs. And these documents were legally open, but you could only see them basically if you had the CD and the government wasn't sharing them. So that was the genesis of this idea. Let's create a website to share these documents that we receive on PDF. So I just want to show you a few examples of some crazy things that happen when you ask for, well, when I say crazy, it's not that wild and crazy, but you'll see what I mean. If you think about how documents were made in the 50s, the 60s and on, they used a lot of carbon copy. So there'd be 2 copies of one document in different files. And if you get a different analyst declassifying the same document, you can get really different results. So here is an excerpt of a really high-level policy document describing what Canadian intelligence agencies should be doing in the Cold War. And one analyst said, oh, you can't see any of that. And a different analyst said, yeah, you can see all of that because these files were in different actual file folders. They were reviewed by different people and a different decision was taken. So this happens all the time and it's extraordinarily frustrating. And it breaks down, I think, trust and my expectation that the decisions the government is making are actually based on a real framework. You know, it's obviously very arbitrary if one person says you can't know any of those issues and somebody else says, yeah, you can see them all, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is that in Canada, we have, the government publishes historical documents, and it's very similar to the United States Foreign Relations of the United States series. So the government of the United States, actually under law by Congress, publishes historical documents. And maybe you've been assigned them in class or read them before. We have that too. And I was finding that, sorry, let me see if I can find my example. I was finding that things that had actually been published by the government of Canada, when I asked for the original document, they were sanitizing it. So, you know, if the government's going to go to the expense of hiring historians to publish these documents, and then 10 years later, they're going to say, actually, no, well, that's very, very bizarre. And I call this reclassification, this idea that something could retrospectively be secret. So there's a few things going on here. I'm just sort of adding up the reasons for why this project came to be. One, it was sharing these documents, the CDs that I talked about. How can we share them? The other is actually sharing with the government decisions the government has already taken, so they know that this stuff is open. And so now I all the time actually send the government links to my own website to say, did you know that one of your analysts actually already opened this stuff? Because here it all is. So these are the frustrations. And so the United States has at George Washington University in Washington, DC, there's something called the National Security Archive, which is a private organization. It's not like the NSA. It's a different NSA. They were really the leaders in the US of making declassified documents publicly available. And so I met with them and I said, I would like to do the same thing you're doing because we've got these unique Canadian problems, but you have a good solution of sharing this stuff. So we have put together this website where we try to make these documents available. And the first challenge I've had was, holy smokes, this is a huge amount of work because I'm teaching, I'm doing my own research, and now I've got all these stacks of CDs. When am I going to find time to organize this information? Because what it looks like when we get it, it can often just be, sorry, let me just show you. It's an actual scan of a file folder. Like this is the front page of a file folder in the archives. And then here are so these are Joint Intelligence Committee minutes from 1953. It's just page after page of document. And there's no distinction between them. You don't know when one ends and when begins. I mean, as an example, that this isn't only of interest to Canada, that there's this big discussion, and actually this is when the Canadians are learning about intelligence products that the United States is going to start creating, that Canada is going to start copying because of our joint commitment to defending North America. So the point is they've just scanned this whole file folder, and they just send it to you as a PDF, and then you have to make sense of it. So what I started doing on my own was just extracting the documents from a big PDF and having a document level PDF. And then I wanted to share it. And you can't just, well, you could just throw a document up online, but what I wanted to do was make sure that people knew where I got it from so that they could go and find the original document if they wanted. It could be a clue for their own research, but I also really wanted the government to know where I got their document from, especially if they're saying that it's top secret or I shouldn't have it. So what that means is we need to attach information that we call metadata to each PDF. And that, I'm going to show you that too, and it's another time-consuming element. And then there's uploading this stuff, and then it's making it usable and effective for other people. So I want to show you what happens basically in our classrooms or with our projects. I will end up with I will have requested from the government, please send me this file, and this file on Canada's appreciation of the Soviet Union at the end of the Second World War, for example. And I know the specific archival folders that I want, but they're closed. And the government in this case responded to me with 3 batches of PDFs, maybe 1,500 pages of documents, all about sort of that early Cold War period. And I thought there was a good project here. So I worked with a student who is interested, and really she did this. I really shouldn't claim any credit. She's created on Canada Declassified what we call a briefing book. The idea is she went through these documents and found the most important documents from that series of folders that could tell the story to someone who isn't going to do the full research. And there's going to be other uses I'll mention. And so she wrote a brief summary here, which you certainly don't have to read, but this is the period when George Kennan is reporting from the Soviet Union, the famous long telegram that'll set Cold War policy. This is basically Canada's long telegrams, if you will. And here, what the main thrust is, she's all along the left are the dates and titles of specific documents, which you can then see and then read Elisabetta's little description of those documents. And so she started with, I guess, about 1,500 pages, if I remember, grouped the documents into 3 different periods, which are on the side here, kind of like our table of contents, and then picked the key telegrams or policy documents from that era and describe them. And so what this does is it gives her experience working in archival documents. And instead of writing a traditional essay, this pushes her to think about how she could explain in brief these documents to somebody else. It's a different task than writing an essay, but I still think it's a really valuable tool. And she got better at it as she worked at it, of being concise and explaining what happens in a particular document, how they all work out. I don't know why that one wasn't loading. And then the beauty of this for me, and selfishly, is that now I use this as a unit in my course where I talk about the early Cold War. So I have a lecture on American, British, and Canadian policy at the beginning of the Cold War. Canada likes to group itself with America and Britain, and we probably don't have too many American, British, Canadian comparative foreign policy courses down here, but it's a big thing in Canada. So we read George Kennan's long telegram, and we read the British diplomats' telegrams, and now the Canadians finally are able to actually read the Canadian telegrams, which had not been available because they had been security classified for so long. So we have a whole series of these types of briefing books, and students have done them for independent studies. We have a summer program where students work for 4 weeks on a faculty research project. We would usually get about 185 applications for 5 spots, and the students are paid to work with me as a team for the summer. That's how this really got jump-started. And this is the one model we have where things are presented at the document level. And there's a few different iterations. Now I'm thinking, okay, what can we do next? As some of those declassifications have come in recently, we received some documents that confirmed for the first time that Canadian military officers in Vietnam in the 1950s and 1960s who were there to monitor the Geneva Accords. So Canada was not fighting in Vietnam, it was there monitoring the Geneva Accords. The Canadian officers there, it had long been rumored that they were passing information to CIA and SIS, or British MI6. And so just 2 years ago, we got documents that said, yes, like the 1962 document that says, here's how we're giving people the American and British intelligence agencies information. We're meeting them in Saigon, we're passing them this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So I wrote a journal article about these documents, but I wanted to connect it with the project. So what I want to just show you is, this is a great thing to come and then show somebody a footnote, but I'm sorry. It's a footnote I want to draw your attention to. For every footnote in my article, I give people the identifying number of that document. And I show the website where you can go to see all of the documents that I used for the article. So sorry, let me just show you what that looks like in practice. Here is the website's page with a little bit of information about the article, but really the whole key is that all of my footnoted documents are available. You don't believe me that Canadians were passing information to CIA and SIS? Here's the document that says it. And so I've done this with a couple articles now. The articles, I pay the fee for them to be open access, $3,000. It's not my money. I couldn't do that, but I apply for money to do that. And then try and create articles that are open to students, scholars, interested public, but allow people to go a little bit deeper. Because I think that there is a PhD topic here that somebody could adapt just some of these documents I found and go deeper. And I wanted to make sure that if somebody wants to study this stuff, here's what I've got, use this, give yourself a sort of boost to get going. So this is the second kind of model, is that we use the website to support articles and publications by letting authors put their primary sources online too. And then the third thing, sorry, I've gone on and on here. It takes so long to process these things, and the students become very good at it and very quick at it, but there's just so much material that we've started to bulk upload things. So been going back and finding, and actually literally meeting up with colleagues who have these CDs, getting the CDs from them, taking the information from the CD, putting it onto my hard drive, uploading it to the website. And I'm not going through at the document level here, but putting up as much of the raw documents as we can. So in Canada was in Somalia as well in the early 1990s alongside the Americans. And there was a huge Canadian disaster as well, separate from the American one. And someone had requested all of the documents related to Canadian operations in Somalia. They'd requested them in 2011. It took years to get them, but they've been sitting on a CD since maybe 2013. And now you can just download them all. And it's a huge batch, 16. Some of these are in the thousands of pages. But at this point, I don't have time to go through and identify key documents, but somebody who wanted to do a master's or a PhD or even a senior thesis could do that. So we're trying to coordinate and collect all of this information and put it together. Maybe I'll just show you what this actually means in practice. This is the back end of the website. And this is software that is free, that our university, it's free to anyone, but our university is able to connect it with its library website, and my university gave me a domain name, stuff like that. It's called Omeka. Has anyone used Omeka or heard of it before? Okay, great. So you probably know more than me. I mean, it's just like point and click and you just do it. But we have 24,000 items, and it's basically this big sort of inventory of PDFs that we then have students make these web pages, and they're just beyond easy to make. Here, for instance, is what one of our briefing books looks like from the back. It's actually just these little tabs that you can add and create, and you just put in the information that you need, and then that is your website. So maybe I'll just show you the front end, and then I'll take a break. In this case, we have all of our major series of intelligence reports that were passed to UN peacekeepers in Bosnia, but because they all went through national channels, we basically have the Canadian copies of these. So this is what the web page looks like. It'll take a long time to load because it's such a big file, but that's what the web page looks like. And all that looks like on the back end is just these two little boxes of text. So even I can figure this out. It's very technically illiterate, as historian, as you said. And the simplicity of this website, I think, can really sort of multiplies what we're able to do with just a handful of PDFs. I won't show you the metadata and so on, just to say that every PDF includes information about where the document is from, its title, its date, etc., so that you can always go back and see where a document came from. In this case, we actually show the metadata. So if somebody wanted to go to the archives, you would just say, I would like to see this information, and they would actually just bring you, in theory, if they were open, the physical file that we are now making online. So I go on and on and on. I'm just going to stop because I don't know if there's any particular direction people would like to head in thinking about this or discussing. But does anyone have any questions or thoughts or ideas?
To what extent have people been picking up on it and using it? So outside of your circle, but how do people actually find it? How do they find it? How do you let people know that it's there? The footnotes is one way, but
yes,
that's still a pretty narrow group who are going to find it that way.
Yeah, this is a really great question. So we do track analytics, but I do not have the login right now for the analytics section. So somebody else has that. So in theory, we should be looking at that. I share stuff on Twitter, which is interesting because that makes me sort of old, I guess. Like Twitter is not as cool. Maybe I should use Instagram, or I don't know what would be better. But I noticed that a lot of people share these things. We'll get hundreds of retweets, for example, but the number of people who actually follow the link is considerably less. So I see a lot of people sharing this information to others and say, oh, you might be interested in this, you might be interested in that. So we have generally pretty good reception and uptake when we announce that we have a new collection. But I think it's going to take more time for people to actually use them in a scholarly way. So I'm seeing like people are positive about it. And I hear anecdotally from people who use it in their class at other universities, sort of through word of mouth. But I haven't seen major impacts. One really interesting thing, though, just on this, is that we just did this briefing book on United States Strategic Air Command, which all major SAC operations and training were basically over Canadian airspace in one way or another. We were the highway to atomic war. And I don't know if it's, so we got 1,700 individual documents, and a lot of them were actually United States Strategic Air Command documents that are still classified in the United States. So I had a US scholar reach out and say, I'm a SAC pilot, I've published books on this, and I actually had to redact things according to the US government that are now open in Canadian archives. So it's sort of interesting connections at that level, but it's not big, I guess. So thinking about how you sort of make those connections. It's also, people say that, the study of Canadian foreign policy is like a three-toed sloth, and that there's three people who do it. So it's a pretty small world as well. But I'm trying to make those international connections, like the UNPROFOR intelligence reports. You don't have to be a Canadian scholar to use that stuff, or a scholar of Canada, and same with Strategic Air Command. So trying to think about those international connections is how we're trying to branch out a little bit.
And what is the government? I mean, how is the Canadian government reacting?
In some pretty interesting ways. The Library and Archives Canada people really support this. And I've reached out to them, and we've had meetings and discussed, and they're really enthusiastic because they believe that's a part of their mission. The power ministries of the government of Canada, if we can call them that, are less enthusiastic and supportive. And it's really peculiar because institutionally, they're not doing very much to help us. But on a one-on-one level, whenever I talk to someone from the intelligence community or defense community, I always make the case that it's better for people to be informed about their work, and they always agree with me on the individual level, but institutionally, I'm not seeing the dams break open yet. So, yes, sorry. Oh, sorry, I thought it was a hand.
I mean, it must be, I'm sorry, I was not nobody else is talking.
Yeah.
It must be really, I mean, it's pretty damning for them that you find these contradictions, right?
Yeah,
so,
right.
And I'm wondering if there are repercussions down the line that you might not even know about. Do they ever go back and look at who did job A and who did job B? Does anybody ever get in trouble? Does that make people more conservative in what they're now releasing because they don't want to be the guy or gal who did too much?
Yeah, exactly. So there, two interesting points there. One is that, and this is talked about this in the US a lot, is that the incentives are on keeping things closed because there's no punishment if you keep something a secret, right? Then somebody should appeal, then it should just get figured out over time, but there are real career implications for releasing too much. So the institutional incentives are for people to release less information. And so we do see that, and that's why I'm trying to give people a tool to say, no, it's okay, this has already been released. I had a sort of a major incident last year by my standards, in that I had asked for some documents from the 1950s. It's basically the Prime Minister's Department of the Government of Canada sanitized a speech that had been given by the Prime Minister in the House of Commons in the 1950s. So it's like a speech in Congress or whatever. It's like it's a public record that is in all of our Hansard, like our, and actually just sanitized parts of it. And it was in our national newspaper. I raised a lot of attention about this, and people were sort of so upset. And it just shows this massive disconnect between, or what happens when you ask people who have day jobs to try and understand or know the historical significance of something from 60 years before they were working. So probably some person whose job is now liaising with the Americans on continental defense, with like real serious responsibilities, was sort of, this ended up on his or her desk, and they said, okay, can you please clear this or not? So it just reveals this lack of historical knowledge, and that's something we've been talking about more, and we have been proposing solutions, and they've been in our newspapers and stuff like that, but no real traction yet. Yes?
I was curious when you were talking about like what went on before you had this idea and it became more organized. And I guess she sort of touched on it. Like, was there ever kind of a concerted effort between like historians and scholars like you to just like ask for as much as possible and like from different avenues, because you're gonna have different people doing different jobs, like you would get bits and pieces, like different bits and pieces, that is? Was that ever like kind of openly acknowledged within the scholarly community, or was that just kind of what happened and you find